think experience is the best teacher. Playing the game of football, you learn so much about yourself, and it makes you stronger.
One of the hardest things to predict before the beginning of the college football season is the Heisman Trophy winner, and so today we will attempt to do just that. Why? Because it's fun. But before we really get into this, I want you guys to comment down below your Heisman favorite. But today I will give you guys my argument for Jalen Milroe and why I believe he will win the Heisman and why history could potentially be on his side because he can do some of the things that the other guys in the past have done. Also, before we get into this video, I want to say this because I already know you guys will say he's an Alabama fan, he is biased. Well, that may be the case. Everybody has their biases and different things like that. But either way, I still think he can do it. So if you haven't already though, make sure that you guys like, comment, and also subscribe to the channel. And with that, let's get into this video. So Jalen Milroe last year dealt with some adversity that now looking back at it actually helped his career in a weird way. And it wasn't that clear at the time, but going back even further, the adversity began with the transfer Tyler Buchner, who came in with the, at that time, offense coordinator Tommy Rees from Notre Dame. But the questions would not arise until the end of the Texas game, where Milroe would have one of his worst games of that season, going 14 of 27, 255 passing yards with 44 yards on the ground. His completion percentage was 51.9, which was his second lowest that season. But what made that game so bad was the 2 interceptions that came at critical times in that game and ultimately helped the Texas Longhorns win that game. And after all of that, we would see him bench the following game against the University of South Florida in a wet and rainy affair. A lot of people before this game were also calling for the benching of Jalen Milroe. I was not one of those, but a lot of people before the game believed that Tyler Buchner and Ty Simpson could potentially do a better job. And from that game, we learned that Milroe is the best QB for the job. Ty Simpson is about a year away or so, and Tyler Buchner is a wideout right now at the University of Notre Dame, where he started out in the beginning. Well, we didn't know at the time that Tyler Buchner would now be a walk-on wide receiver, but what we did know was he was not the starting quarterback for the University of Alabama. Fast forwarding into the rest of the season, Alabama would go on to run the table, adding one of the most satisfying endings to an Iron Bowl game that I have ever witnessed in real time. I lost my mind. Then you follow that up with a win over the Georgia Bulldogs, which propelled the Crimson Tide into the playoffs. However, once in the playoffs, they will ultimately lose to the championship winners Michigan in a game that was very physical and was up for grabs the entire time. But in dramatic fashion, the game would come to a close. That play was talked about across all social media for a very long time, or at least until the national championship game, and I'm pretty sure left a nasty taste around the program as a whole. Despite that, though, Jalen Milroe finished the season with 2,834 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions with 531 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. Not a bad season at all in what was his first full year as the starter at Alabama. A lot of things to improve here and there, but for the most part, he was off to a very good start. Probably the most athletic guy on the field on any given Saturday, great deep ball accuracy, and as the season went on, he began to recognize which plays to make, when to run, when not to run, when to force a throw, when not to. He still has things to work on, such as the mid-range passing game, as well as the ability to recognize different coverages or speed up his progression through different coverages and recognizing what a defense is trying to do. But the year as a whole could not end without some of the most dissatisfying news in recent Alabama history to add to the mix.
We have some breaking news out of the world of sports to bring you right now. Sources telling ESPN News that University of Alabama football coach Nick Saban is hanging up his coach's whistle. The news coming just moments ago.
So now we welcome the new era of football. Kalen deboer is a guy who almost had a Heisman winner last year in Michael Penix Jr., an offensive-minded guy who I believe will get the best out of Jalen Milroe and add to the mix. I think the way that the Heisman has been handed over the last few years or so boosts Jalen Milroe's potential of winning it. If you are a guy who can throw the ball effectively and make plays with your legs at the same time, the odds of you winning the Heisman Trophy may be a little bit higher. Nothing is guaranteed, but let's throw out some names starting with Tim Tebow. In 2007, Tim Tebow had 3,132 passing yards, 29 touchdowns with just 6 interceptions, and he rushed for 828 yards with 22 scores. In 2010, Cam Newton had 2,854 passing yards, 30 touchdowns, while only throwing 7 interceptions. He also added 1,473 yards on the ground with an additional 20 touchdowns. In 2016, Lamar Jackson finished with 1,538 rushing yards, the most ever by a Heisman winning quarterback. On top of that, he added 3,390 yards and 30 touchdowns with just 9 interceptions. In 2018, Jalen Milroe threw for 4,504 yards, 40 touchdowns, while rushing for 892 yards with 11 scores. And looking at last year's winner in Jane Daniels, who threw for 3,812 yards, 40 scores with just 4 interceptions, he also added 1,134 yards with another 10 touchdowns on the ground to add to his already great Heisman campaign. And those are just a few QBs who at least had 800 yards on the ground in a season. So in order for Jalen Milroe to even be in the conversation, I believe he's going to have at least 800 running yards minimum with at least 3,000 passing yards minimum. And I believe he can do that part. Now, I'm not saying that those stats are going to win the Heisman this year because somebody else may just blow that stat line out of the water. What I'm saying is Jalen Milroe is a guy that is capable of doing this. And if he does that, he will set himself up to be in that Heisman conversation. He will probably need more than just 3,000. He will probably need around the 3,500 mark and maybe 1,000 rushing yards, something like that. But what I'm saying is he needs at least that to be in the mix, because you do have guys like a Quentin Ewers, who I believe will also have a fantastic season, who will be in that mix. Shedeur Sanders will also be in that mix if Colorado can win some games. The storyline behind him will be insane. You cannot forget Carson Beck in Georgia, because that team is going to be very, very good. And so you got to throw a guy like Carson Beck in the mix. But I would say between those 4 guys, if you were to pick any of those, you probably would be safe in the Heisman race. Now, every year somebody pops up who we did not initially think about in this Heisman race. You just never know. The season as a whole is very unpredictable, but that's why we love college football. You never know what could potentially happen on any given day. And that's just football in general, right? Even if you aren't a fan of the NFL, anything can happen on any given Sunday. But I believe that's what brings us all together as football fans. But at the end of the day, I believe Jalen Milroe is going to have a fantastic season and shock a lot of people. He has had a year to develop. He has a chip on his shoulder to prove the haters and the doubters wrong. I think everything is coming together to motivate him and eventually win the Heisman. Now, you may disagree, and I would love to know, who do you believe will win the Heisman right now without any games being played? Because it's very interesting to see, because this take that I have right now could completely change in about 4 or 5 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks or so. Somebody may emerge as the clear-cut favorite. You just never know. And so I will address this Heisman take at some point in time during the season, and it's going to be interesting to see once we actually have data, once we actually have stats and actually have games played, eye tests, all those things, who will remain on top of the Heisman race ladder. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. And with that,